Yeah.
Well, guys, it's Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
Give you one of those.
This day has been an interesting day for me. I made a post last night about midnight-ish or so. A good friend of mine, Mike Hess, runs a company called BIT, Blind Institute of Technology. And his whole goal in life is to get blind people and people with low vision jobs. That's
cool.
what he trains them how to use
Salesforce
as the platform. And it's an amazing endeavor, and I'm just so impressed by him. And so that was my post today. But for all of our normal podcast listeners, today we have an awesome guest right over here to my stage right. Cam Beaudoin, who is an avid accessibility advocate. You cannot be anywhere on LinkedIn without seeing his stuff. Hey, there's Roland Banez. And then he is also the president and owner of Accelerate Accessibility. So Cam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I think we've been trying to plan this for quite a long time, right? Every time we'd see each other at conferences and stuff, we said, let's do this. And it wasn't until Access You just last week where we said, no, let's do this and put this on the calendar. So I'm so happy to be here. You guys are great. And I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I felt bad, right, Chad? Because we had been on his podcast. He was like, great, no problem. Let's set it up. And that was like, I don't know how many months ago. Right?
It was a while ago. It
was a bit ago. So,
but, you know Cam and I were talking at Access U, and I'm like, darn it, let's get it on the calendar now. And I pulled up my calendar and I put it in, not realizing that we chose to do this podcast on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So it kind of snuck up on us, but it's exciting. It's cool. I think it's very apropos that we're doing this live podcast on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So
totally. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Well, and it's our first time live. We're actually using StreamYard for those who are not familiar. And so if we make any mistakes, it's all on me because I'm the one who said, hey, let's jump over to StreamYard. So
and there's no undo, right? Yes. Like we can't fix anything. So
hey, Chad, do you want to roll into our sponsors for this podcast? Do we have sponsors for this podcast?
I think this week, Chax is our sponsor.
How about Creative Pro? It's Creative Pro Week, right?
Because that's coming up very, very soon. So
yes.
Welcome to the Chax Chat podcast. And we'd like to thank today's sponsor, which is Creative Pro Week. And Creative Pro Week is, am I going to get this right? June 6th to 9th?
5th to 9th.
5th to 9th. Yep. So June 5th to 9th in Phoenix, Arizona this year. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Phoenix in June should probably be pretty warm, I'm thinking.
Every time we go to a conference, I always bring my swimsuit, and every time we go, I never get to go swimming. I think this time I am absolutely going to make time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question. Do you still wear your blazer? With
and his tie.
Today I'm not even in my normal shiny stuff. Actually, I have off camera here. I actually have an emergency vest and shirt sitting in the wings just in case I need it on a moment's notice. So you are correct.
Only you would have an emergency vest, and I'm not surprised. But
well, I'm wearing pants today, which is really great because I'm like, if I have to stand up for anything, I'm in trouble. Right? Oh, that is great. So today, being Global Accessibility Awareness Day, we know everyone's on the web right now, searching through all their accessibility, content, or they've been, curating for the week to make sure today is the day they post something. And I wanted to pose the question to you guys because we are 24/7 advocates, right? Mm-hmm. We live, eat, and breathe this stuff. Matter of fact, I have a new tattoo. You can see it there, right? My new accessibility tattoo.
We all noticed it at the conference. So cool.
Did you? Yeah. So, but how can we get other companies to be engaged in accessibility more than just today? Cam, what do you think?
So I think about this question a lot. And the video that I posted this morning about GAAD was to really talk about and celebrate the advocates themselves. I mean, there are so many of us who are the champions, the professionals, the specialists, the consultants, or not even in having accessibility in our titles. We're just the people who are in the organizations trying to move this forward. And I think we got to celebrate ourselves a little bit here, give ourselves a pat on the back. If there's one day that we can allow ourselves to say, all right, we've done some good, because I was on Google and I just searched up GAAD, and there were so many news reports of other organizations doing something, right? And I think that's something that's really important. We need to celebrate the doing of something. And yes, there's a whole argument against people are just being performative, or doing something one day a year is not really moving the cause forward. But I tend to maybe naively disagree with that a little bit, because I think awareness is that big thing, and awareness is curiosity. And I talk a lot about curiosity in my talks, in my presentations, because if we can start to create curiosity with the rest of the people in the organization or outside the organization, in our communities or whatever, that's something that's going to move this forward a little bit. So we got to celebrate those small wins.
Agreed. Chad, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, it's kind of like my wife says, like when Valentine's Day comes around, she says to me, I'd rather you love me every day of the year instead of just one day. Right.
Right.
And I kind of feel the same way, right, about, promoting and advocating for accessibility. Right. GAAD is fantastic, and I think it brings awareness to a lot of people, a lot of companies. I think it's a really great thing, but, all of us here, right, we have to walk the walk, right? And I've seen other people, and it's very consistent. When you get involved in accessibility, and I don't care at what level, I don't care if you're doing web accessibility, document accessibility, lived experience accessibility, I think that all of us see accessibility everywhere we go, right? I know that that's the case for me. I mean, and we on one of the podcasts where we had the people from North Idaho College, and I brought up the fact that when I was grocery shopping, all of a sudden it hit me, right? Like, how does a blind person go grocery shopping?
Right.
And our guest actually explained to me how they do, right? But it was really interesting, right? Because ADA, right, says that the grocery store needs to offer somebody to help them, but that's also not a great experience, is it? Right. I think arguably a much better, the much better solution is that they can now do it online thanks to COVID, right? Thanks to COVID, now everybody can just shop online. So anyway, accessibility becomes our lives, right? I guess is what I'm saying. And I think we need to celebrate it every day.
Well, we do a lot of, when we are at conference, we do a lot of Ubering, right? It's the obligatory Uber ride from hotel to conference place. And typically the Uber driver will ask, so what are you here for? What do you do? Et cetera. And so many times the conversation's exactly the same. I tell people we help other people who design documents and digital content, make them readable or digestible for people who are blind or low vision or have other disabilities. And they said, and almost always the response is, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
And it still shocks me. Somebody I've said this story many times. I was at a barber and getting my hair cut, and he asked me what I did. I explained it. And I said, well, it's like, if you're on Instagram looking at videos and images and things, how do you know what you're looking at if you're blind? He said, I didn't know blind people use Instagram. And I'm just like, whoa.
We live in such a bubble, though, right? Do you think other industries do that too? Like if I went to a conference on diesel engine repair, and I got into my Uber, and he said, "What are you here for?" Well, I help repair diesel engines. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't want to assume all Uber drivers are don't like to learn more about the intricacies about diesel engines. But I've had the same conversation as well. I've had the same, like, I didn't know that the 45-minute drive from my hotel to the airport was going to turn into one more advocacy moment where I'm educating and teaching and talking about real lived experiences. Because I'm not sure about you guys. I get this all the time too. When someone at the middle of the conversation says, you know what? I remember my grandmother not being being, in their words, confined to a wheelchair after 60, something like that. All of a sudden these real lived experiences start to come out. And that's where I strike a chord. That's where it really starts to come home.
Well, in our last trip from Austin, I'm coming back from the hotel to the airport. My Uber driver, we're talking about what we do and what I do, and he goes, "That's awesome. I'm a teacher, and I'm required to do this kind of stuff." And I said, "Great. Let me send you some handouts. Here's my card. Let me send you some tip sheets on how to make your content more accessible. I'd love to help you out." And he was like, "What? You would do that for me? That's amazing. Man, you are just awesome." And I'm just like, "No, I'm just trying to help you out, man. We're all trying to do stuff." And it is the thing, right? Because we in between everybody else's quote unquote normal job, and I'm using air quotes for that, we have to do this other thing. And if you're not used to what that is, it is hard in the beginning, and it is hard to understand and get your brain to really think about how a crossword puzzle as a class activity might not be inclusive.
Yeah. Well, when we were at, was it CSUN, guys, where everybody was playing bingo?
Yeah, it was CSUN,
right?
Yeah.
And so they had Braille bingo pieces, right? So to be inclusive, and also the bingo pieces were very big. Right, like there's a giant letter on it, so that even if you were low vision or had difficulty with some of those letters, you were able to participate, and it was really cool that everyone was participating. It was a fantastic experience. I think often, Dax, you and I have run into that situation where we're in a restaurant, and I mean, it drives me crazy. They dimly light the restaurant, right? Like, so that you could barely see anything. And then they say, "Oh, the menu you could get to the menu on this QR code," right?
Right.
And you pull up the PDF and you're pinching and zooming and you're, and we were at one
Thank God for liquid mode.
Well, and we were at one restaurant where Dax and I opened it in Acrobat Mobile and went into liquid mode, and we're like, whoa, this is amazing. We could actually see what options there were. And part of me wants to, like, at those restaurants, go around and say, "Hey, are you having trouble viewing the menu? Let me show you something." You know what I mean?
That sounds something like my wife, I would do, and my wife would be like, "Dax, you don't
stop."
It's like that commercial.
Well,
you don't have to help them. They didn't ask you.
Well, and there's that other or not a commercial, but I forget what it was, but the husband would go around asking people if he could have their leftovers.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It was some weird show. I forget what it was, but he would just go ask people for their leftovers and take them home,
Wow.
And she was so embarrassed, But anyway, a little bit off topic there, but anyway.
So Cam, let me ask you, what are some specific steps? I had I'll preface this with a little backstory. I was playing Oculus. I play poker on Oculus Rift, and this gentleman I was sitting at the table with, I always mention what I do and in conversation, and he goes, "I own a business. I really would like to hire people with a disability. How can I attract more people to my company?" So maybe I'll ask you that question. What are some things? I'll give you my answer, what I gave him, to fill in some of the holes. But what are some things that companies can do to attract more people with disabilities?
Right off the bat, I mean, this is never a let's get this done right away. I love to see the spark. I love to see the, hey, I know how I can change the world. Let me go and hire people with disabilities. And then then it stops there, because there's not really any forward path or steps or like what's the next step to do. This is really, we got to get integrated into the community. We got to learn more about the people who, are going to get hired. What is the job description itself? Like, there are so many steps before there. So my step is always like, let's start the job description. Let's start at something that is easily customizable by you and something that is easily modified by your HR department or something like that. And that usually includes rewriting the job description to remove things like, must lift, I was going to say kilograms, but anyone in the U.S. doesn't know what kilograms are.
Right.
So it's like must be able to lift 30 pounds or something like that. And these are all legacy things that just kind of get copy pasted from job description to job description. No one's really thinking about it again. Another one is must be able to communicate verbally and written effectively. That's another one where a lot of people who are neurodiverse maybe aren't able, they won't even apply. That's the thing. Does that really need to be in there? Can we just assume that if somebody is applying for the job, then they've probably got the skill to communicate in some way with you? And it depends. Is this a customer facing role? Is this just an internal role? Are you doing, no, I don't want to say data entry, but is this a call center role? Then like, does the current job description truly match what the role actually is anymore? So that's where I always start. And like, then there's a whole bunch of techniques after that, but maybe I'll just take a pause there, because that's always where I start. Like, what does your job description look like, and what's the actual role that's being filled?
And go ahead, Chad.
Well, and just like, Dax and I, we do document accessibility, and we're always telling people to reevaluate how you've done something, right? Like, does it really need to look this way, or can we make a change to kind of facilitate, making it accessible? Like, wouldn't you agree, Cam, that one of the ways that you might be able to attract people with disabilities would be to reevaluate your workflow, right?
Right.
And maybe determine, like, hey, if there's a task that all my people are doing that is kind of slowing them down, could I assign that task to another person?
Right.
Possibly who has disabilities, that could offload, right? And we could distribute that effort among more people, right? So I am always telling people, ask why, right? Ask the question why, right? And don't be afraid to answer it honestly, right? Because if the answer is because we've always done it that way, it's the wrong answer, right? I mean, it's a horrible answer to the question.
Well, the other thing that I mentioned to this gentleman, and as I said, well, how many people with disabilities? Well, I said, first of all, do you have an accessibility statement on your website, right? Is there something on your website that tells this person who's looking to try to come work for your company that you acknowledge that accessibility is a thing, and that they have disability or accessibility awareness? That's like a first step, right? And actually, I learned at Access U that there is on the W3 website a accessibility statement generator.
Oh, cool!
I did not know.
I didn't know about that.
Actually exists, right?
Very cool. Very cool.
That will help you generate an accessibility statement. The other thing that I told the person is, I said, how many people with disabilities are represented by images on your website?
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there for a second?
Absolutely.
I make it a point in every presentation that I do to only have people with disabilities in all stock photography that I use. And by the way, what's it called? Canva has a phenomenal library of stock photography with people with disabilities. Microsoft and just PowerPoint has a phenomenal library of people with disabilities in their stock photography. So at Access U, when I was presenting 30 some odd slides, every single, except the ones with me, had a visible disability on there or represented disabilities. And I think that's so important, because representation really, really, really does matter in everything. We don't see it at all, especially in North America. The UK is doing some good jobs at putting people with disabilities, visible disabilities, in front of the camera for a lot of advertising and stuff. In game shows, they're now being represented a lot more than they were in the past. We haven't quite seen that in North America just yet. Fingers crossed. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. Representation matters.
No, absolutely. And we've had a lot of, we did a whole entire podcast on, well, not a whole podcast on Canva, but we really hope that, oh, hey, Becca, we really hope that Canva comes to the table. I know they're working on it because initially they had no tags whatsoever. Chad and I had a conversation with them. They turned on a switch for tags, and now it's a bunch of divs and really poor tagging structure, but eventually they'll get it. And I think that they're on their way. It's just a matter of priority and time. So,
they have like an accessibility checker inside their tool now, which I thought was like, that's a recent thing, which is, again, celebrating those small wins. If we're always going out there and there's a lot of people sometimes who go on and say like, oh, well, they didn't do this yet. They didn't. Yeah. But I mean, we have other business priorities as well. Like the employees still need to get paid and they can't go and hire 70, 80, 90 new developers just to do one thing. Because then, as we all know, a developer who says they're an accessibility developer, well, probably sometimes isn't really they'll put something on their resume. And without those checks and balances, they probably, might not have the know-how to do that properly. So let's do it properly. Let's do it well. I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
hey, Stuart.
Yeah, Stuart's there.
Hey, Stuart.
Hey, buddy.
The thing that I think is important is that we acknowledge that it takes direct effort.
Yes.
That it's honestly, it's like losing weight. You have to be intentional about what you do. You can't just slip into accessibility. It doesn't just happen because it's just the new part of what it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we have to be purposeful, but as advocates, we can give them tools, give companies tools. And I know, Cam, part of what you offer at Accelerate Accessibility is that consulting role, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I found a niche in helping organizations build strategies towards getting to whatever accessibility success looks like to them. I have a really good friend. I'm going to tell a bit of a story. He prides himself in being a project manager, but not an accessibility specialist, but he's worked for the past 6 years at accessibility companies. And it's good because he comes at this challenge from a business mind. He comes at it from a business point of view. And he always says, you can be a champion. You can say you're an accessibility warrior, whatever you want. But all the good intentions don't change hearts and minds at the leadership level. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of our focus should be put. Like, if we work on gaining influence and changing hearts and minds and to change people's mindsets, we're going to get a lot further than just standing on a soapbox and saying that this is the most important thing to do. Right. So where I help organizations is when an organization is ready to make that change, I'll help build out their roadmap that usually will get them to a point much better than where they are today within 6 to 18 months. And I don't just look at a website. I'm looking at their procurement policies. I'm looking at their hiring, just like what we talked about, their hiring practices. What does do you have an accommodation policy? You mentioned, accessibility statement. A lot of organizations, and when you look under the hood, none of their internal tools are accessible. They don't have any kind of accommodation policy. Their managers, leaders, they've never even been talked about or trained on what is disability etiquette, right? If we only say website, then that's kind of all we see. That is just one layer on all these different things about making a company that cares about disability inclusion. And by the way, I tie a lot of that into the future of work because this is a big hot topic right now. And I love it. It fits so nicely into that too, because organizations are now thinking about how do I retain really good talent, right? Like everyone's talking about that right now. People are losing talent. There's not enough people who want to do the job. And so how do we do it? Well, they're offering hybrid work environments. They're offering bring your pet to work. They're offering all these extra perks. And when you can start to highlight things like, and we've got a generous accommodation policy, that if you need a way to customize your workspace to be how you like it, well, we've got that. And that tends to land really, really well. I recommend it to anyone who's listening. Start talking about, what are the positives about this? How can we be optimistic? How do we say, this isn't just about, getting sued. This is about, let's transform your workplace into to being a successful workplace for 2020s, the 2030s, 2040s, and beyond. Don't we want a sustainable company? I can go on.
Yeah. Well, and I think companies forget the fact that there's a huge talent pool among people with disabilities, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, you're restricting yourselves because you're not including, you know, that group of people. And I really think education is huge. You know, on Facebook the other day, a friend of mine posted something and he said, just saw somebody park in a handicap spot, but he got out of the car and was walking just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And
so many problems, right?
It was an opportunity, right? And, you know, and, you know, like your first reaction would be to just pounce, right? You know, but I just eloquently said, you know, like, we need to remember that not all disabilities are visual.
Correct.
Right? Like, not all disabilities are in your face, like, you know, and so, you know, just remember that, you know, and, you know, like I said, like, you know, I resisted the temptation to pounce and just kind of, you know, tried to educate, you know what I mean?
Right. And it's not only up to people with disabilities, with lived experiences, to advocate for themselves. And that's where the rest of us come in as allies, right? I mean, I'm colorblind. Okay, everyone, I'm colorblind. You talked about games. I'm useless at poker because I can't identify the chips. In fact, I've got some good stories of my friends ragging on me after a couple of beers where they're joking. Are you sure you wanted to raise there, Cam? I'm like, damn it. Reds and greens are hard. But you know, it's for allies, right? We have to remember that it's not only up to people with disabilities to advocate for themselves. It's that's a big part of what we do as well. It's huge.
Cam, I'm going to use that, right, Dax, because we always show that illustration when we talk about, use of color, right? And in charts and graphs, and we talk about adding a label is huge, right? Putting R on the poker chip or G on the poker chip or a symbol, right?
Around the border, it could have little triangles for the red one and little squares for the green one. It doesn't have to be overtly like in your face that this is something, but it can be a subtle difference. And when someone says, "Oh, that's a $10 chip," and you're like, "Oh, that's the one with the triangles."
Dang, I just raised,
you know.
I think my point is there's so many ways, right? Yeah. And they're printing on these poker chips anyway.
Right.
So all we're talking about doing is modifying the graphic,
the artwork,
right.
And no additional cost, no extra money spent, and companies love that, right? You know,
oh my God, yeah.
And we should talk about that too, Cam, right? You know, where companies are like, oh, this is going to cost me money, right? To provide accommodations or to make things accessible, and that's not always the case.
Totally.
Right?
I got to say something about that before I answer. Like I even talk about that. It is our responsibility as someone who's an advocate, specialist, consultant, champion, warrior, whatever you want to call it, accessibility person, to learn how to overcome that objection.
Yeah,
it is our responsibility to learn how to handle that. I had a couple of those questions at Access U because I was asked in front of people, you know, how would you handle this objection? How would you handle this scenario? And of course, price always comes up. And by the way, everyone, this is not the only industry that has a price objection. If you're an entrepreneur, you get a price objection. If you're a plumber, you get a price objection. If you are at IBM, you get a price objection from, $2.5 million. I think we could do this for 1.9. The price objection is part of life. You give a price objection when you have you go buy a car, something, you're like, man, that's way more. Can I price object and get a discount? We have to learn how to handle that. We have to. I handle it by saying, differentiator. I love leaning into differentiator so much, like using the words that will excite people about this. Don't you want to be a differentiator? You don't want to be like every other competitor out there, right?
Yeah.
Leaning into that, like leaning into it hard, like saying like, what, boss, are you kidding me? You want to just be like everyone else? Come on. We can print out poker chips. It'll cost $50 for a dev or a designer to switch up the design. Then we get it printed. Like, why are we even arguing this? And then you walk away. You walk away with confidence. Damn it.
Well, you know that while we were at Access U, Nandita Gupta from Microsoft.
So good.
I got to listen to her session, and so typically when I talk to somebody, I really only use two motivators. As I'm watching their eyes, and I'm looking at them, I'm like, okay, first one is because it's the right thing to do. And I give a little spiel or an anecdote or whatever, and I wait for the aha or the light bulb to go on and them to say, yep, let's do this. And if it doesn't, my next one is, well, you need to mitigate risk. And this is a way to mitigate risk. And it's just two sides to that coin.
Totally.
But Nandita's session gave us 4. I'm actually looking down at her image here, gave us 4 drives. And I thought it was really, really interesting. The first one is drive to acquire. And it's the one you mentioned, Cam, being a differentiator, being at the tip of the spear, being the one who's going to be chosen because you're doing it and others are not. Then the other one is the drive to bond, right? We've talked about this already on the podcast today, saying I want to hire more people with disabilities.
Right.
What do I need to do? I want to bond, right? And then the third one is the drive to comprehend, where you show them that experience. Chad starts his classes with for Word in Acrobat to show them, here's the experience you're creating when you do X in Word. It is that drive to comprehend. Oh, I get that adding extra hard returns or adding dots or tab stops instead of whatever is a bad experience. And then the last one is the one that I tend to use a lot, is the drive to defend. Mm-hmm. And that is the people with disabilities deserve the same access, the same rights. And as someone with a disability, being neurodiverse, you deserve that. So those are the 4 drives that I think are so really cool. And it is acquire, bond, comprehend, and defend. Awesome. And I think those are just really, really great things. So I want to talk about the struggle for someone who has a disability coming to an organization who's not prepared for them. We go back to the conversation we were talking about earlier, which is, how do we get more people to come to our place of business and want to work there? And I think the first thing is having an environment that is receptive to who they are. And you talked about it already, Cam, being, is our business ready for the next 30 years? And if I have a disability and I have to explain it to every manager and every person at every level in the organization, that is tiring. It is exhausting. And so as a person with a disability, I'm going to go someplace else where they understand me, where they have a neurodiversity statement on their website that says, we embrace people who are neurodiverse because of the information they have, because of the way they look at problems, and help us sort things out. So Cam, what are some ways that companies can set themselves up for that kind of an environment to let people know, hey, it's kind of like we're open or we get you. Maybe a hashtag we get you.
Yeah, I like that. The accessibility statement is always like the first bet. I, in fact, don't even procure tools now that don't have an accessibility statement on their website. We could maybe talk about that in a little bit. But I think that etiquette training is probably our first, our very first bet, because a lot of managers out there, a lot of leaders, they've never even realize they're speaking about or to somebody with a disability. Like, they've never even done it. And I don't blame them. I do not blame people who have never received training before. They've never been in the situation where they've realized that they needed it. And there's lots of specialists out there who will come and speak to organizations about etiquette, to share lived experiences and start to understand that you don't say, you don't, if you have an employee who is deaf or hard of hearing, you don't walk up to them and shake their chair, right? Like, that's not an appropriate way to get their attention. It's gently tapping them on the shoulder and, waiting until they turn around to respond, because nobody wants to feel like there's an earthquake happening all the time. Right. I think it all starts starting with that compassion, understanding, and empathy. Yeah. It's got to start there. So, I'm not sure how you'd highlight that, though. To be really honest, I'm not sure how you'd highlight the fact that we've all taken accessibility or disability etiquette training. So,
but I think you could put a profile page. Why not create a profile page that says our commitment to understanding to an inclusive workplace, right? And then you do a couple pictures and a little paragraph about that we do this kind of, accessibility awareness training or whatever the case may be, to let people know that's a thing. A lot of the companies now have these work groups. There's a 3-letter acronym for it. It's escaping me right
ERG now. Or BRG groups.
Yeah, they're the Jacobs, where I used to work before, we had ACE, which was the accessibility. It doesn't stand for accessibility. It was a carers work group, and then they had a group for women in the workplace, and people who are African American and people who are Mexican and or of Hispanic descent, and every group had their own focus. And I think having that on your website, showing that you have these internal groups that really allow people to bring their best selves to work, people who are who have who identify differently. When you can show people that, hey, we get you. I love, Aaron says, I love that new hashtag, Dax. Maybe I'll start using that hashtag.
I like it.
We get you.
I love
it. But just having that statement out there, just something, right, Chad? Anything?
Absolutely. I had in my mind, I wanted to say something. My wife and I watched the latest episode of Ted Lasso last night. And if you've not watched his show, it's the best show ever.
Hold on, don't spoil. I'm going to take off my headphones. No, I'm joking.
But they used a quote in the episode yesterday: "What you resist persists."
What you resist persists. Mm-hmm.
And it's by Carl Jung. It was a quote by Carl Jung. And when you think about that, isn't it so true, right? Like these companies who are resisting, the accessibility or implement accessibility in their organizations, they're just continuing to make the problem bigger and harder rather than embracing it. And I just thought that was just a really kind of a profound, quote, because it's so true in many things, when you think about it.
Agreed. So we've talked about how to kind of open that door, right? I think the other thing is that you really have to live what it is that you do. Mm-hmm. And when you open that door, I think back to about a year, maybe 2 years ago, there was a company on LinkedIn, and I won't call out who they are, but they were an event planning company, and they put out this how to create an accessible event PDF. Oh, yeah. And I downloaded the PDF and I looked at it, and of course it wasn't accessible. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, this isn't accessible. Can I help you make it accessible? And they said, we don't know what that is. We don't know what that means. And I said, well, let me help you. And so I gave them a little bit of training, and I said, hey, if you're going to jump they said, well, look, we're just an event planning company. This seemed like the right thing to put out there. We aggregated some information and we put it into a document. Right. And I said, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for doing that. But if you're going to jump into, and I did say the word our space, if you're going to jump into our space, you have to be ready to go jump in with both feet. You cannot just throw this out here and then say, well, oh, we don't really do that part.
Yeah, they were almost using it as a marketing method, right? Like a way to attract, maybe a new group of people. But to your point, Dax, it like I always say, like we got to walk the walk, right? And, Dax and I, every document we put out, almost annoyingly so sometimes, because QuickBooks does not create accessible invoices, but I make them accessible just because, and
you have to.
So it's just, we really do have to walk the walk. If you're going to do this work, you need to dive in with both feet.
Happened to me the other day. I spent hours. I was small business owner, right? I gotta get some tools. I need some tools to accelerate my productivity. Okay. Yeah. What I wanted was a client portal, because with I'm hosting a training, a masterclass soon. And what I want my students to be able to, just go to one place to get portal, because I know Slack is good, but I don't want to keep just dumping files in Slack. I mean, it seems like you'll get lost, or emails, same kind of thing. So I'm looking for a portal. I'm not going to name the company because companies that that target and cater to small business owners are, generally speaking, small themselves. I mean, we're not talking at the Salesforce level. I can't afford the $1,500 per month that, some of these large organizations, I can't do it. So what I was working with this company, and I was working with this portal, trying to customize it and get it all, in place for the students. And at the end, what I said? I'm like, I didn't check this for accessibility. So I opened up the view. I opened up the client view, the student view, start poking around with the screen reader, start running some accessibility checkers. And sure enough, none of it. Like, we're talking about divs instead of tables, and we're talking no headings. We're like the basic stuff, like the really, really basic stuff. And I'm like,
because you did it in Canva. You say div.
I did not do Canva. But then I went on this massive mission on trying to find a tool that would satisfy my needs that's fully accessible, and it did not exist. And I found another company like what you just said. I found one that they had an accessibility statement. They had documents and blog posts on accessibility. None of their tools are accessible. They're like, this is how you can make the colors accessible, but their heading structure and page structure is all broken. I cannot represent this industry if I'm handing off an inaccessible tool to my students. I can't do it. Yep. So I was like, nope, not working. And that was frustrating. 14 hours. And it's thrown down the drain.
Well, and that's when you reach out to us, right? We can help you. Cam, drop the URL to your masterclass in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, I can. Here, I'll share it with you, and you can send it off to the chat. I can't send it off here, but I'll. Yeah, they don't give me power on my live show. I've got the power, but you got the power.
We have the power.
You got the power.
It's getting kind of hectic. All right, we're losing followers. We need to go.
Yeah, quick. The stats are going down.
I know. So I'd like to. We're at 42 minutes, which is typically right around where we kind of do our normal podcast. I wanted to just have one final topic, because this is something that's, I don't know. I want your opinion, both of you. Someone reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, how come you don't do image descriptions in the body of your post? That you only do alt text, that you're not doing image descriptions?" And we had a conversation back and forth, and she said, well, this person said that some people not everybody uses a screen reader because they're expensive. And I was like, not sure that's true. And not every, so they'll use a text to speech tool, and not all text to speech tools read alt text.
Right.
And I was like, I just was a little confused, because I'm like, if I'm blind or low vision, I'm going to use a tool that gives me access to all the information. Right. So let me ask you, Cam, do you put image descriptions in your body copy as a general rule?
I don't. I just put the alt text.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know that I know the difference. Like you mean the image description would be like actual text? Kind of like a caption.
So Matisse, our good friend Matisse does a really good job of including an image description at the bottom in just regular text, so that someone who might not be accessing the alt text because of the tool they're using would be able to get it. Okay. I don't disagree with using it, and I think that if you are using if you're trying to maximize the amount of accessibility and outreach for your post, then you would want to do that, right? It is the creme de la creme, right? Like, I talk about the accessibility infographics and all the different tips and tricks you can do to break them apart and give a better user experience. And I think this person was bringing up the idea that, hey, you could be doing this. Why aren't you? Right. And I just wanted to get your opinions. I mean, I would like to say that I'm an advocate. I feel like I am. But I'm not sure that this is one where I am 100% committed to absolutely, we've got to do this. It needs to be my new mission.
Yeah. I think I would agree with you, Dax. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, where you're never going to meet every possible requirement, right. That's available, right? I mean, we do our best. We do as much as we can. And you know, when you know that there's a tool out there that does read a website or a document efficiently and well, and somebody's using an inferior tool, and I know that's an opinion, right? But if they're using a tool that does not do as good of a job, I don't know whose obligation it is to make that correct, you know?
Well, and the opposite of it is true. We see this in documents when people use captions and alt text in a document. And what do we tell people? Artifact one or the other. If the caption is exactly the same thing as the alt text, they should only be presented with one version of that content, not hearing it twice. And if we as accessibility advocates are putting image descriptions in the bottom of all our posts and then also putting alt text the same thing, now that screen reader user is going to get it twice. And I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that.
And also, if we decide to only put the description in the body of the post, which, you know, to avoid that situation, let's get the best of both worlds. Let's make it visually and there. Then an automated tool is going to knock us for not having any image description or any alt text. And then, you know, people look at it and say, well, look, you're failing. You call yourself an accessibility advocate, and yet you don't have any alt text here. You know, it's one of those, this is the gray area. And actually, this is why I love this industry, by the way. I love these types of healthy debates. This is why I stay in it. I mean, not only why, but it's one of the fun parts of this. It's to understand these debates of how do you see this and how do I see this? And is there a place where we can come together in the same spot without ire? That's a big thing that I try and push against. You know, it's like there's not one way to do this, and as long as we're consistent. Ben, hey Ben, I didn't say hi. Ben is talking about Meryl Evans, and she talks about this quite a bit too, where for a long time she just missed a bunch of images on her website with for putting alt text. Yep. She went and fixed it. She went, oops. Yeah. All right. And if you know, and that was just what she did. She went back and fixed it. I don't know, but I'm with you guys. I just put the alt text. I don't put any description in the posts.
Well, and you know, I pay for the Twitter, the $8 for my Twitter posts to get the blue check mark, only because I want to be able to edit my post. How many times have you hit send and then went, oh crap, I forgot to put the alt text in there? And then what do? You got to delete the post and make a new one and add the alt text. So with the blue check mark, I have the ability to go back and edit that post to allow me to add alt text. But you know, this morning, I posted on Twitter about the fact that even on LinkedIn, you can't add alt text to an image if you use it in a reply to something else on LinkedIn. Right. The same goes for Facebook. You cannot add alt text to something if you reply to another comment. And I just think that's such a shame that we're trying to be so good in one way, but yet we're falling short in another.
Well, I think some of these companies, you know, I mean, we look at that limitation and we're like, how much development effort would it take to fix this? You know what I mean? But I think some of these, you know, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, they're ginormous organizations, right? And so to make that change, I mean, Dax, you and I have dealt with developers, and we know that the speed of developers, and I love them. I love all you guys, and I'm highly impressed with what you do. But they move at a snail's pace, right? Like, you know, in my brain, I'm like, can you just fix that this afternoon and send me the update, you know? But, you know, it doesn't work that way in the development world. So it's certainly a challenge. So, you know, we hope that they're working on it, right? Hopefully they're working on that and are going to make some improvements to that. All right, guys.
All right. Yep.
Well, listen, once again, we want to thank Creative Pro Week for being the sponsor on today's podcast. Again, you can see in the little message at the bottom of the screen, Creative Pro Week is June 5th to 9th, and it's in Phoenix, Arizona this year. So if you're a designer or you're in the design space and you care about accessibility and just graphic design in general, definitely check it out. There's still time to sign up. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in, and
and thanks Cam for being on our podcast. We appreciate. We have now crossed the finish line, and I will say, Cam, this is the longest podcast episode we have done to date. So new record, and
first live.
Yes,
first
live. This is the first live and longest podcast. So we appreciate you being here for 2 milestones.
Yes,
and we'll look forward to the next time we have you on. Thank you, everybody. Today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Try to be an advocate every single day, but today, take some extra time, do something special to acknowledge the fact that other people do something maybe differently than you, think differently, talk differently, or interact differently, and embrace that difference. We love you, and thank you so much. My name is Dax Castro. Chad, we're going to flip this. There we go. Go ahead. My name is Dax Castro.
My name is Cam Beaudoin.
And my name is Chad Chelius.
Where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, guys. All right. That is it. Oh, that was great, man. That was pretty good.
That was awesome.
Yeah. I'm getting used to actually managing all the controls.
You're still live.
I know.
Okay. Hold on. You want to see me disappear, everyone? Watch this. Watch. Who is this guy? Oh,
I don't know. No hat. There is nobody there. All right.